So I'm just going to start off with a question, and then we'll pass it around to the audience. So Brian sort of set me up for this with dropping this term, which I'd never heard before until about a week ago. Collectivist, right? Or it's a sort of pejorative, right? The idea that you accuse someone of collectivism. You sort of join every petition, but you don't actually commit to change other in your own personal life, or you don't engage in more direct action. And what I thought I'd invite you gentlemen to sort of weigh in on is whether that, first of all, whether that's an accurate thing, whether you should even think of it in those terms, but also in your own work, like how do you make that? How do you convince people to make that leap of faith? How do you make in some of your campaigns, you talk so much about the human network. What are some of the things that in your strategies you've learned about converting things and converting people's participation to more kind of direct action? So anybody who wants to take that one.
I'm going to go with the direct action. Because
right.
that's I find that the best way to engage people is to have them do stuff, right? And my experience with that is less environmental and more sort of reasonable. But in that, if you, excuse me, can you hear me now? Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to keep it at that, just engage them, have them do things, and ideally real things, which is, I want to qualify that a little bit, but I've been involved in several campaigns in my life where my job was to just sort of stuff envelopes and make calls to people who didn't want to hear me, go door to door and things like that. And I think those are a little bit dangerous. Those can really turn people off and make them a bit cynical. So things like, helping farmers, that's a really good way to change people's minds about the way things work. Or, deal with someone who's actually been killed by a bomb or tortured by someone whose government was supported. We make these personal connections and actually engage people in the whole process. It just transforms their lives. So again, it makes everything real and maybe it's constituents. So that's my thought.
I'm good to go. Yeah, I can give you 2 or 3 examples of ways I think that we've tried to go at WWF beyond collectivism to real action. I think that what I talked about earlier was a lot of collectivism, right? Because we were talking about endangered species that are in other parts of the world, and we really needed to engage leaders in government and in faraway places. And so there wasn't a real great way for people to participate otherwise. But every year WWF stages what is one of the single largest moments of activism globally in an event called Earth Hour. The 8th Earth Hour was just this last Saturday, and it's an hour where we ask everyone to turn off their lights for an hour. It's not about the energy saved from turning off the lights, but it's a symbolic action that people can take, and that has grown into something that is celebrated in over 153 countries each year. Tens of millions of people do it. Countries have adapted it for their own environmental issues. I could go on and on, but the idea there was to take something where people really felt powerless and give them one simple thing to do, was just turn off their lights for an hour. And we thought that might only live on for a year or 2, but it just celebrated its 8th year. So that's a really powerful thing. In the US right now, we have a campaign going on called Renewable, It's Doable. So really trying to get people to focus on how they can integrate renewable energy into their lives. And so what we're asking people to do is to just get a quote for solar on their house. I'm not telling you have to buy anything, you have to do anything, but if you just get people to take a simple action, some percentage of them will actually do it, will actually convert. But if you ask people to, what's harmful about getting a quote for solar? We're not pushing any one company either. So I think things like that can really make a difference. And the final action I would say is we're asking people to look in their own backyards. So much of the work we do is around the world. But there's this wonderful migration of the monarch butterfly that occurs every year that nest in Mexico, but then sweep across the country throughout the spring and the summer. And many people in New York State would find them in their own backyards. But the monarch butterfly migration is threatened by the lack of milkweed that is being decreased by the increased use of herbicides and pesticides in the country. And so one thing that people can do because we may not be able to control the farming practices, very simply or easily. But what you can do is plant milkweed in your own backyard. So you can get a plot, get a pot, put it on your rooftop, put it in your backyard. And if you plant milkweed, you create a welcoming environment for the monarch butterfly and help to save their migration.
This seems like a very problematic question because you're asking, how do we move from collectivism to real action? But my point of view is that collectivism is a false, it's not a real term. Like, there is value in getting the word out and encouraging people to tell their friends and get them involved. And it might be a low buy-in. And then there's additional work to do to get people to climb the ladder of engagement, to take action in their own lives. If it's political change, to get, instead of just signing a petition, but to actually join you at the Capitol, or to call their legislator or governor and actually join you in doing physical things. But it strikes me that we shouldn't confuse the fact that we can reach out to these people, to supporters, and engage people at the low effort level. It doesn't mean it's not worthwhile.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think sort of follow-up point on that is the fact that you can leverage these global social networking tools to go local, right? And I think that's something, all of you have talked about, the idea that, just because it's a dialogue we all have when we're working with social media, the idea that in some way that draws away from your ability to be a local advocate, right? 6 million people online, but you don't know the name of anybody who lives on your block, right? And that's a problem, right? But there are ways to sort of flip that around so that knowing of 600,000 zillion people online, being able to connect to them all helps you connect with people on your block, right?
I just have one thing to add, and you're totally right, that it's about these examples of social change. Like, people talk about the Twitter revolution, but was it really Twitter that enabled the revolution, or was it just, it made it easier for reporters to follow what was going on, and it made it possible, it made it easier for people to organize. But you can't really separate them, but it's important. I think it's important to recognize the value of the tools.
And I actually want to backpedal a little bit as well, because I've got my favorite story that I tell all of my students, sometimes inappropriately. There was a psychologist, maybe Richard knows his full name, his last name was Ben. In the 1960s, he made the observation that when he asked the question, do you like carrots, people would answer, I'm eating them, therefore I must like them. And the idea that his insight is that people rationalize their views from their behavior. So the traditional rational actor model says we make a decision and we act on it, whereas what Ben argued is that we look at how we're acting and then we rationalize it. So that is one way that's happening. Like the collectivism actually works very well. I shouldn't even say collectivism, but just things like campaigns and all. I mean, the kind of things we talk about. Not just say collectivism. I don't want to be that.
Email.
Like that. But the idea is when people go and click on these internet campaigns, what they're doing is reinforcing behavior. So it's just sort of an interesting thing to think about psychologically.
Anybody have any questions out here? These folks? Yeah.
So we discussed collectivism and sort of getting someone to change their behavior. I guess what successes and failures have you seen with sustaining behavior? And if you created dashboards to basically monitor the metrics for those early activists. And I just wanted to see if you guys would shed any light on that.
That's a really good question, and I think that's something we all struggle with, which is to how to monitor and measure people's behavior change over time. So we definitely have the analytics and the capabilities to look at of those people that we engage that become part of a database that we can measure. How long they will engage with us, how frequently they'll engage. So in terms of opening emails, clicking on petitions, And so we can monitor that. I think for sort of widespread behavior change, that's a little bit harder to do. So if you wanted to say, I don't know, like what percentage of people are recycling, 1 year to the next, and there are other ways to get at that behavior and that data. So we were looking at that kind of individual change. Does that resonate?
And one thing I was thinking is, one of the odd things about activism is success means making yourself irrelevant. And so sometimes we see drop-offs in interest. I've been dealing with certain organizations, but they'll see a drop-off in interest. They'll have a big campaign, and then suddenly no one's answering their emails or doing anything. But I think we are seeing examples of definite change in terms of sort of assumptions that are being made about what, like gay marriage is an example people are talking about, where once we have one debate, and now it's not even something people talk about. So, I mean, I'm not answering your question, but I'm saying that sometimes the drop-offs are very, very difficult to measure. You have to look elsewhere for the answers, like how do you local green market, things along those lines.
I agree with you.
I would just add that I do think that you can look at, large, polls that are taken in the U.S. to see how issues are changing over time, right? So, and to see if you think that what you're doing is adding to that or adding to the measures. We had done a holiday campaign with Coca-Cola for 3 years where we were raising money through Coca-Cola for polar bear habitat changes in the Arctic, where we're looking at an area that we call the last ice area. And what we were able to measure was that 38% of people prior to the campaign in the U.S. didn't, thought saving polar bear habitat was important. 90 days later, 52% of Americans thought it was important. So you saw a 14% increase through a national poll, and it was the only big thing happening in America during that time on the issue.
I have a question about the relationship between the successful strategies you shared and our first panel. So could you reflect a little bit individually about, I guess, two questions. One is, how much do you think the work that you and your colleagues do is influenced by the best data available about what causes behavior change? Is that what really drives the strategies that you create, the way that you proceed, an understanding of human psychology? So first is just kind of a yes-no question. How much is that embedded in your work? And then can you share some reflections about how to increase the extent to which these two groups work together, sort of the researchers, the folks who understand what drives attitude change or behavior change, and the people who create the digital tools? How can they come closer together, work together more effectively?
I need a second. Okay.
Oh, I definitely have answers about that. With the work I was doing in Sulawesi, for example, what was interesting is that the metrics about it weren't about behavior change in Europe or North America. It's actually, the metrics were all based on like yield changes and resistance to pests and things along those lines. So I was totally blown away. I was just a small cog in this process, but the field researchers and biologists I was dealing with were completely informed by the best, most contemporary sort of agricultural and biological research. But what I found on the other end is, at the market end, it was just all bullshit, right? It was just like, let's be nice to these guys, and the emphasis in the market was, let's show the farmer we're helping and stuff like that. So there wasn't, it was just a whole different ballgame that didn't have numbers associated with it. Or, well, maybe it did, but it's sort of different.
So I think that's a really great question, and part of me is thinking about what Brian said earlier on the carrot metaphor. Sometimes you're eating the carrots and then you're saying, gee, yeah, I guess I really like carrots, as opposed to doing it beforehand. And I was thinking when I was giving my presentation, or right before it, I thought, yeah, we're doing exactly what Edward said in the first session. We're laying it out, the big, simple, easy, clear message, and I think there's a push and pull there. We learn as we go. But I think we have, I would say within our own group at WWF, become much more disciplined in the past years, and we're learning so much through social media and activism that's happening today from other sectors as well, and we try and incorporate all of those best lessons into our thinking. But it can be very difficult. So much, it was so interesting in the first session of hearing a lot of the theory about how these things should work. And then when you're actually in it, and you're in the middle and you're doing it and you're applying it, you get a lot of pressure from other places. So for us, the people working on the ground in places and the people managing our programs, they may want us to say 100 different things that they think are important, and we're looking at it and saying, no, we really need to stick to this one message or you're going to lose everybody. So I think that other pressures are sometimes at work that kind of can force you to steer away from what you know to be true or the philosophies of the academic research behind social activism.
We certainly have examples of both in my work. I mean, we have a very small shop, so the people that are doing the data analytics are the same ones that are sending the emails, and basically we love it. It's just as much as we can be informed by these kind of weird psychological kind of tricks you can use to get people to get more engaged. We're going to be using them, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to get this feedback. So I think it's good.
We got a whole bunch of people in the room, so go ahead.
So my question is, I work at a social justice organization, and I find a lot of this interesting because we're mixing, we do environmental justice work. And so my question is, for organizations that are smaller, that can be helpful in, I guess, pushing environmental messages, but when you have an overall kind of like pushback against kind of like identifying and sometimes helping those that are most vulnerable, right? So like you have people that, I guess if you were to poll the word justice, like they don't like that word, so we try and like use other words for marketing, and sometimes it's hard to like put like a person that's as charismatic as like a rhino, like a baby crying.
Sure.
And so my question is, thinking about this and thinking about like shortened capacity, what are some of the tools that maybe you use or could recommend, or what are some of the ways that you get some of your messaging and all of this other stuff together? Because we have a staff of like 13, and we can barely probably get like a communications coordinator, and we have like no marketing budget. Find interns to do that. And so I think, there's lots of organizations that are like that are kind of like piecing things together, and sometimes finding it difficult to also either support their staff to either come to a conference like this or figure out a way to like partner with the lab to get like an interesting app done, or just barely have time to like put things on their Facebook page, let alone integrate like a bunch of things that are going to be connected. Because their website might be like a WordPress website that occasionally someone updates once a month.
This question is probably for me because I'm from such a small organization. We have 14 people, so we have 2 people on comms, and there's some pretty amazing tools out there. Some of them are even free. I have a whole list that I can send you of great tools you can use, and something that might be interesting for your work is sending advocacy by text message. It's like an emerging technology, or it's not an emerging technology, but an emerging method. So you can send out messages, people can sign a petition by text these days, people can donate, and this especially might be useful for reaching people that wouldn't open an email, but they would certainly, they would open a text message. So I think that's something that we're looking into, and I think it might be useful for your organization as well.
The only other thing I would add is, sometimes the first step to fixing something is recognizing it, and so it's great that you recognize the need for more communications, and even taking the steps of hiring interns, is great. I think that one of the tricks might be to demonstrate how communications can actually help your fundraising, and therefore being able to allocate at least the budget for one person, who could work on it and take some steps towards demonstrating that. But I think with the kind of tools that you're mentioning, social media can make you look and appear much bigger than you actually are as a small organization. And sometimes just trying and testing until you hit that right button that makes things really surge, like you saw with the spikes that you experienced when you really focused on making change with your tools.
Question. So when I hear you guys talk about your program, which are awesome, by the way, it seems like the sort of the message is developed and by the organization, and the particular pathway to kind of engage people is determined by the organization, and then the social media is used to kind of like push that into the world and get people to engage and take action and support this message. But I'm wondering, have you guys seen any opportunities for sort of a distributed decision making in terms of what that message is? Like, for example, with like the rhino horns, like I've heard people argue that illegalizing the trade is not necessarily the right way to go. One way to go is to essentially heavily regulate and make it legal, but heavily regulated and fold that money back into protection of species. So and I'm not saying that's the right or wrong way to go, but I'm wondering to what extent do you guys see opportunity for that kind of debate on what should be done to be distributed as well? Or is it just sort of not part of this methodology? Is it kind of like a separate arena that happens somewhere else, and then once that organization makes a decision, then they kind of use these tools to spread the word and try to take action?
We work a lot in coalitions, and it's extremely difficult to have a debate on issues that are really important, and in terms of how do you find strategy for achieving a certain policy. Like if we have a goal, for example, with the oil trains, of making them safer. Well, our grassroots organizations, they want a ban. And then we have organizations that want it to be safer, so they want more regulation. And then we have organizations that are convinced that it has to be through legal means, it has to be through a lawsuit. And our perspective is that it should be, we're putting on the governor's doorstep. But we get everybody together in a call, and we can hardly accomplish anything. So I'm really not sure what the answer is. I don't think a platform exists for having structured discussions and kind of and voting and things like that. Maybe you could make it.
I think we're being sort of defeated on the whole topic. I mean, it's really sort of depressing to say that the Koch brothers have actually succeeded in turning the debate around on us. Though if you look at the rest of the world, they aren't winning globally. In China, for example, there is no doubt about carbon pollution, greenhouse gas pollution being an issue. And that's really good to know, right? They may not be doing as much as they can about it, but it's not universal. And the second thing is, I just have a sort of tiny, in terms of the cooperation thing, I've been really impressed with the work that the Tides Foundation does, because they're very conscious about trying to coordinate activity across the entire sector. So, Tides. I mean, that's just personal experience, and it's really a very narrow view. I don't know, but it is neat. It's great that there are some people that are used to taking this stuff seriously. Because sadly enough, the small organizations just do not have the resources at all to do anything. I shouldn't say anything. It's always very sad for me to deal with how fundamental the issues are. Small organizations are doing people get a message. They have terrible computers.
But has there been any coordination of the same organizations, not only through the social media, but also with the mainstream media? I mean, your particular example was a fantastic article that the New York Times did about Albany becoming an oil patch a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you instigated it or if it just happened, but that kind of thing, having a 1-2 punch, and of course, Keystone Pipeline is another very good example of things going at different levels all at the same time, because just going through the social media, just going through the Twitter, whatever, is not going to do it. You have to get people at different levels of whatever is their preferred communication channel?
I'm from Canada, and one thing that really struck me about America is just how freewheeling its democracy is. So to a certain extent, maybe you just described the way America works, as opposed to just trying to centralize things is so difficult. And not even centralize, coordinate things it's astonishing how difficult it is. But at the same time, there's a great deal of self-organization in the system. I don't want that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you're asking some really big questions that I wish there were simple answers to. I mean, on the issue of climate change, it seems one of the biggest obstacles in the way is how politicized the issue has become. And so when someone was mentioning earlier the way that HIV was fought in this country, or the tobacco issues, or littering and pollution in the 70s. I mean, a lot of those issues became you stepped out of the realm of politics and became big fights that everyone in the country was pulling for. And so I think that's going to have to be something that happens. If I knew the answer to how that would happen, that would be really great. But there are a lot of really great minds working on that, and we heard some of that this morning. And collaboration, of course, is always important among NGOs. We try to do it as much as possible with smaller NGOs who fill different niches of what we can do. I think that each sector is a little bit different in that way, but that some of these really big, heady issues, they don't get done with by a single organization. They only happen through collaboration of hundreds, if not thousands.
So, basically, I just wanted to build on what my co-panelists were saying. I think that we face a lot of friction in coalition work, and the biggest problem is that there's a lack of clear leadership. I think that there are models of organizations just kind of, instead of working together, joining together in a formal way, and that might be an answer. And to your the second part of your question, we get good press at Environmental Advocates in New York because we have a great communications director, my boss, Travis, who he just has relationships with all the reporters. It's all about staffing in terms of press, and it's not that we get good press because we have social media or because, of course, the issues we work on are important, but it's about calling up the reporters. So it's just about having somebody on staff that can do that well.
And the TV reporters too. I mean, the Rachel Maddow shows and Keystone and things like that. That type of approach is what my gut feel says it's most effective, but I'm not sure if it is or not. You're the guys with metrics.
We have a couple more questions in the back, and then we're gonna break for lunch. So.
I hate when people do this, but I just wanted to add one comment about this small organization thing, because we do work with some really small NGOs. One of them had 3. One of them, one of our most successful, the Story of Stuff project, has 9, and that's because they just hired 4. And their media has been viewed by 50 million people. They have 2 million on their mailing list. They've been really successful. And it just goes back to something I said earlier, which is that bi-directional communication. If you're willing to give up a little control, you can have your community take such an active part, and that the organizations, the small organizations that are so successful are ones with 2-3 people, but they're really open. And you were talking about, like, we don't have a rhino, like, you're as cute as a rhino. And the organizations that take that first person narrative, like Annie Leonard with the Story of Stuff, or Nirvan Mullick with Kane's Arcade, have said, I don't know what I'm doing, there's a big problem, I'm compelled into action. Are you? Join me. And that is incredibly powerful if you're willing to give up the control that bringing in a bunch of volunteers and getting a lot of partners will give you. But I think the organizations that I'm drawn to, that I do most of my work with, are small, because they're nimble. And when they get too big, they lose that dynamism to some extent. So I would say embrace that you're small. We're so focused on overcoming obstacles rather than viewing those obstacles as our greatest strength. So if you're small, that's your greatest strength. If you're big, that's your greatest strength. And play to your strength rather than looking to overcome it. So, and I just because I love these small NGOs, I just want to throw that out there. You guys are awesome, and you don't need to be big to be impactful.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I would love to talk to you at lunch, though, because I would love to talk to you about your organization.
I would like to sort of connect to the question the gentleman out front brought up, and the connection between different NGOs and versus a big power like the Koch brothers, I also think it is really important to look at ethics of big media channels, because I do think that media channels have contributed to the confusion among the population. At the same time, I don't see why the whole population has to sign on to, that climate change is something that's endangering us. If we do have what you mentioned, the leadership, then it doesn't matter what maybe one single person in the pub says, but if we give that one single person in a pub the media presence to sort of spread their opinion and maybe to be on Fox television, then their opinion gets amplified, and the 97% of scientists get reduced to the same level as a layperson, that is commenting their personal opinion. So I know we need a bottom-up approach, but I think we also need a top-down approach of legislation and also of big media outlets taking responsibility. I don't know if you're aware, the LA Times has decided that they're only going to print what is true, and they're not going to print what they consider a lie, and they consider climate deniers a lie that is really just a self-serving, manipulation of the public. So they decided we're not going to print that. But the New York Times, which I basically cherish, has not done that. You go on, the .earth, it's overrun with the worst possible comments, and you think, you can't stem the tide of people making the most outrageous comments there and, spreading their opinion, which they're entitled to, but then it plays into the hands of people who are denying. So what are you thinking of the, old-fashioned big media approach or legislation approach, or just going to Washington, D.C. on a rally? By the way, there is one on April 26th against KXL, so please check out 350.org.
I think that we need to be louder, we need to be more organized, and more sophisticated.
But we're running out of time.
Right, of course, there is no time on any of these issues, but I think it's about nurturing spokespeople. If we're talking about reaching out to large media, it's about, the head of an organization is like a public figure, and if we can just nurture these people that have so much authority to and just nurture the relationships with the press, I think there's something there to kind of stem the tide.
I know I'm just jumping in, but if you have that relationship to the New York Times, could you encourage them to do the same things?
I would just say that, when you're shaping public opinion, 50 years ago, you had to pay attention to 3 networks, and today we have to pay attention to 1 million different outlets. And I think that, none of us may like how traditional media has evolved to compete in this really fragmented media market today, but I think you have to work with all media. You have to work with traditional media and social media in helping to shape that message.
I just had a thought that I want to get out there. I don't know whether I believe this or not, but one thing that I've been struck by, we've been talking a lot about broadcasting our message, getting mass movements created and all of that. But if you look at the people who are going against us, like the climate change deniers, they actually narrowcast their message. Certainly you see things on Fox News and stuff like that, but a lot of their work is actually very targeted marketing that's going to like seniors in South Florida and stuff like that. I've seen some of that marketing. And I just want to get that out there as just something to think about, right? Like, do we always have to be making a big message? Maybe we should be focusing on very, very targeted groups sometimes. I'm not directly answering your question, but just sort of maybe I am, right? Because maybe one of this narrow targets is our legislators. But anyway, I just wanted to sort of travel with that idea.